Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast. We're glad that you are here with us. Frankie and I, Nuge, are your host in this space. We have an outstanding guest for you today. Miss Bettina Sellers is making a repeat visit with us. But before we get into all of that, we are glad to see you here. And as usual, we hop on over to Mr. Frankie and let him tell us what's going on. What's up, sir?
Nuge, I don't know what it's looking like in your neck of the woods, but it is pretty cold here. As we like to say in the country, the hawk is out. That wind is cutting. On my way to sit down for this podcast, I had to go outside, and I didn't think I was going to make it. I've been under the weather a little bit too, but I'm still pressing on, and it's got me a little concerned because this weekend I have a race that I have to run out in the woods, and it's slated to be in the teens when that race comes. And guess what? There's a river crossing in this race too. So we'll see. But if you ask my wife, she'll tell you that I've got some issues that I need to resolve doing stuff like this. So we'll figure it out. But other than that, I can't complain.
Man, I don't have enough hair to be out there running in the teens. So have at it. I will cheer you on, brother.
Nude, you act like I'm over here with a luscious flowing mane.
They make hats for a reason, gentlemen.
Exactly.
Listen. I'm just saying. That's just my way of passing the baton to you, brother, because I'm not going to be out there running in no teen weather.
All right, well, we're going to get it done. I'll report back after it's done. I'll let you know if I turn into a Frank sickle out there.
Yeah, we want to see the medals.
Oh, man, I got you.
Okay. All right. Well, it's cool. As I said, we have a return visitor with us, Miss Bettina Sellers. Thank you so much for being here, Bettina.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. As you all may remember, Bettina was here with her daughter, Alexis Sellers, and we had them both here for our Veterans Day episode. So if you missed that, go back and check it out.
Definitely.
All of the episodes are listed on our website, so just go back there and check that one out. It was a really good episode. But today, Frankie, what are we doing today?
Well, if you saw the episode from Veterans Day, you would have walked away from that episode knowing that Bettina has many facets to the talents that she brings to the table. And today she is coming in a clinical role as a licensed therapist. I didn't get all of the specifics right about that, but she's going to come today to kind of help us unpack the notion of trauma. And I know that is a very broad-reaching subject, but she's going to help us navigate those waters and understand a little bit about recognizing as well as where we can get help in dealing with trauma. So I'm super excited to have Bettina back in the space.
Awesome. Well, Bettina, we're going to let you jump right in here and tell us about trauma.
Yes. Well, hello once again, gentlemen, and your audience. I am glad to be here. So I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Georgia. I specialize, my master's degree is in clinical mental health counseling. I specialize in trauma-informed care. So I do other stuff too. Like I do premarital counseling, and I work with older adults, and I work with families and couples and groups and all of the above. My primary focus and my passion is trauma-informed care. And so, that has become a big thing lately. And so with trauma-informed care, what we do is instead of saying, what's wrong with you, we ask what happened to you, right? Because it's easy. People who are experiencing trauma, it shifts the focus is what it does. And it provides compassion, a safe, caring environment for people to express the events that the trauma has happened. Because oftentimes when we say, what's the problem? People feel re-traumatized. They feel like they have to go over that trauma all over again. And they don't want to do that. So by doing that, we're compassionate. We We practice, there's different modalities that we practice, that we practice with them as far as the trauma therapy. We emphasize safety, trustworthiness. We want people to feel empowered. We want to collaborate with them, and we also want to be culturally sensitive because everybody's trauma experience is different. Some traumas are based on culture, right? Because there's certain cultures that have certain experiences and other cultures do not. And they're like, oh, well, that never happened to me. And then also within a culture, someone can have an experience and they say, you know what I mean? And it's like just because we look alike doesn't mean that we have the same lived experiences.
Are there people who don't necessarily recognize that they are experiencing trauma from years past?
Absolutely. And which is a really great question. So when we look at, so because I specialize in trauma informed care, I always assess everyone that I talk to. It doesn't matter whether they're couples, groups, I assess everyone for trauma at the beginning of the session. And I let them know that I'm assessing for trauma. So they're not sneaky questions. They're not any, there's different assessments that are out there. There's assessment tools. People can pull those up. I'm not going to sit here and try to name them. And however, there's assessment tools. Well, we as therapists that focus on trauma, we go straight to finding out what those traumas were. Here's what people don't understand. There's not one adult human who has not experienced some level of trauma. The difference from one to the other is how you processed it, how you were cared for in that traumatic situation, and as an adult, how you're caring for it now. So if somebody says, oh, I've never had a trauma. Well, a trauma for me might be, and I'll just give an example. My brother brought this up to me like a month ago. He says, do you remember when our dog Pup Pup got hit by a car when we were at the bus waiting to go to school? And I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, and I remembered it immediately. And I went back there, got teary eyed all over again because I remember it was a small dog. His name was Pup Pup. We were at the bus and the dog just kind of took off, got out of the house and ran down to the bus stop trying to be next to us. And, it was a puppy and he got hit by a car. I remembered it so vividly because my brother, being as brave as he was, well, we didn't have veterinary money. So let me just say the dog wasn't going to the vet. Dog just got a hole dug, right? So, however, what I remember is the dog's eye was hanging out a little bit from where he got hit. And I'm just screaming and crying. And he's like, I got him, I got him. And he took him home. Needless to say, I didn't get on the school bus that day. I went home. However, as a child, I didn't sit for days and days and days and cry about him. I moved on. My brother took care of it. My mother said, we can't take him to the vet because we don't have vet money. And so the dog, slowly passed and, I didn't watch that, but he buried him and took care of it. So I remember that was a traumatic situation for me to see a puppy that I love dearly get hit. However, the way my mother cared for me and the way my brother cared for me, I was able to be really resilient in that situation. And I didn't find myself growing up where I never wanted another dog or, every time I see a dog near the street, I don't panic or shake or get nervous. I was cared for in that time. There are children who are not cared for when they see or have a traumatic situation for them. Doesn't mean the parents don't love them. It just means they might not have known exactly how to care for that child in that situation. So it'll show up in a
So,
different way.
so trauma can actually get locked in a vault and just show up at some indiscriminate time in your life.
Exactly. So I'm going to go first to small children. A small child can experience a trauma, and that trauma can look like I said, like my puppy. The trauma could look like abuse in a household, seeing a parent, one or the other, doesn't have to be the female, one or the other of the parents being abused, physically abused. A lot of loud profanity and cursing, or even instead of being disciplined, being beat as a child, which in that respect, it may be considered you're on punishment, right? I'm going to punish you. That's traumatic in and of itself. So it can show up in children with things like bedwetting, not being able to focus and pay attention because they're seeing this over and over and over again. As a child, most of them don't have the ability to say, I feel really bad today because I got beat yesterday. And I don't know why that happened to me and why someone that loves me would hurt me that way. Children don't necessarily have the language to do that. So it'll show up as they might be fighting in school. They're not listening. They're not doing their homework. They have difficulty focusing. And then, the school system might say, oh, the child has ADHD. So it's showing up as ADHD and they don't actually have it.
So there's a misdiagnosis
Absolutely.
because as the children can't express the trauma in a way that an adult would recognize to be able to properly diagnose it, or at least someone who's not trained to ask the right questions or
Right.
delve into the right way.
Right.
My goodness.
Saying that, Frankie, just makes me think growing up, different things happen in our lives growing up, and our parents would be like, boy, ain't nothing wrong with you. Going back outside and play,
Exactly.
you know? And whether it was, truly a traumatic experience or not, but I remember those types of commands. And I guess if I think about it long enough, I could probably come up with a few traumatic experiences that I had during that time. But they didn't know. They just wanted me to out the house, go play, summertime. Other kids were outside, go out there and have fun.
Right.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, bringing that up, I mean, I need to look in the mirror and check myself because I know even recently I've come out of my mouth to my son. It's like, man, ain't nothing wrong with you. Come on. You just sore. Keep it going. Go outside and rub some dirt on it. You'll be fine. So I got to check myself at the door there too.
And you know what that has to do also with Frankie is boys are boys boys are reared differently, right? Boys, they really are. And it's not even the whole you shouldn't cry thing. It's not that. It's just that they're socialized different. So there's a whole phrase that it says mothers love their sons and they raise their daughters, right? So you need to be able to take care of yourself. You need to be independent. You need to be this. And with the boys, it's like, that's my baby. Okay, I'm guilty. I've done it. I've caught myself doing it. However, boys are often socialized as kind of man up kind of thing. Like don't, you not that necessarily that you don't have to cry because that doesn't even have to be said to a boy. It can be implied. And it can be implied in that if I'm a boy and I never see my father cry, or I never see my father show emotion, or the emotions that I see my father show are anger and frustration, then how do I know how to share my emotions when my heart is hurting? I'm not gonna, I'm gonna go, in either in my room or somewhere where I feel is safe. And I'm either not gonna cry, I'm going to get more angry, and more frustrated, or I'm gonna go there and feel that that's the only safe place I can go and cry.
In your previous comment, you mentioned a word that really pricked my ear. You talked about resilience. Um, what is the intersection between resilience and trauma? Are they diametrically opposed to one another, or is resilience a finite resource that trauma can overpower at a certain point? How are those two things related?
Oh, the way you phrase that is exceptional. Never had it phrased to me that way. So they're not diabolically opposed, and trauma can overpower resilience if you don't get help for it. It absolutely can overpower it. However, every one of us has a level or has the ability to be resilient. And like I said, it has a lot to do with how your trauma is cared for, even as an adult, because the trauma as an adult. So, say a child has a childhood trauma. I'm going to take it back. You have a childhood trauma. It was never cared for. Maybe you were misdiagnosed, as you stated, and it's not just ADHD. It could be ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. Oppositional defiance disorder is a child who just totally acts out, constantly fighting. We have children that throw chairs across the room and tables across the room, kindergartners and preschoolers. And the first thing they want to do is they want to diagnose the child with like oppositional defiant disorder, or we call them RAD kids, reactive attachment disorder. They have not figured out how to not attach, or they've been left, or they have abandonment issues. And it could just be the trauma of the abandonment. So maybe the child doesn't have oppositional defiance disorder, or maybe they don't have reactive attachment disorder. Maybe they just need that. They play therapy. I do play therapy. That's not my specialty though. I refer people who to children who need play therapy as a way of overcoming and becoming resilient when they have experienced a trauma. When that trauma takes itself from childhood to adulthood, it shows up in so many different ways. When you look at somebody who is an addict, when you look at someone who has an alcohol addiction, a drug addiction, um, anorexia, things like anxiety, depression, promiscuity. All of those things can show up when we as a trauma specialist look at that, we think, what was the trauma? We don't go to, oh, that person's an addict. We think, what was the trauma? Because babies, unless they're born to a parent who was addicted, right? And or alcohol fetal syndrome or whatever. Normally, unless it's a case like that, you're not born with that addiction. Now, people say you have a predisposition for it because you had a parent that was an alcoholic, or if you're not born with alcohol fetal syndrome or an addiction to drugs because you had a parent who used drugs, the brain doesn't naturally go to being an addict. It can be the cause of a trauma that was never cared for, that you weren't taught to be resilient. And that's the thing that we have to start teaching, and they're doing a really good job now in kindergarten even of teaching children how to be resilient when somebody doesn't want to play with them. It's small stuff. You can't go in a hole and fall in a hole when people don't want to play with you. We're starting to teach children resilience really, really early. And so it shows up from childhood, and then you become an adult and you have this stuff. And so me, when I look at somebody with an addiction and whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, I think, I wonder what happened. What was the trauma that happened that never got cared for or was never healed?
Well, let's shift gears for a minute. We're talking about children, but you being a veteran, uh, there's all kinds of trauma in the armed forces, right? All kinds of trauma and first responders, right? Give us a little bit about how our veterans and first responders, kind of understand or deal with the trauma that they experience, whether it's trauma that they experienced today or yesterday, or even, 5 years ago. I imagine that there's still a lot of first responders that are holding trauma from 9/11.
Mhm.
I'm sure there are many war veterans, pick a war,
Mm.
that still suffer from trauma from the wars. Talk to us a little bit about that group.
So veterans, first responder, and like you said, immediately when you started talking, I was thinking about the first responders for the September 11 events that happened. And so the brain's complex mechanism, so for survival, what happens is we compartmentalize certain things. So the brain, we go into, just like the mindset of a fight or flight, we go into, we got to take care of this. As a first responder, you kind of already know that you're going to see and experience some things that that the average person will not see and experience. And in that moment, your first reaction is to react, is to respond, is to take care of, is to deal with. Whether you're on the battlefield, whether you're at the towers coming down, your first reaction is, let me get everybody to safety. Let me take care of everybody. Let me do this. And so you're in high stress situations like that, you're thinking about your immediate safety, the safety of the others around you. By the time you have a chance to settle down and stop, it it could be a triggering event. For example, even just watching something on TV for a first responder that was there. And sometimes for some of us, if you're watching a TV show and you see a building crumbling in or coming down, you can get your heart can race a little bit. It doesn't have to be where you're perspiring or your hands are shaking. If you watch that and it was on TV constantly, if you're watching that, you can have that same reaction, that heart rate speeding up because of first responders and people who have served in the armed forces. Your brain is already geared up and keyed up that you're going to be in dangerous situations. Your brain's already geared up and keyed up for that. So when you go in and you take care of it. You're used to taking care of it. It's what you do. I take care of it. I know everybody's okay, or sometimes people aren't. You may not think about that again until you're triggered 6 months later, 8 months later, or you may start feeling it even in the moment. You're hyper vigilant. You're constantly, your head's on a swivel is what we call your head being on a swivel. You're constantly looking around and you're constantly checking places for safety. A lot of people, and in some instances it's men because they might have been taught this, but many military people don't like to sit with their backs to the door. Male or female, we don't like to sit with our back to the door. I don't. If I'm
You're
with a
right. I
man,
don't either.
right. If I'm with a man, I'll sit. I'm okay with that, right? If I know that his back is not to the door, and I know that he's got my back, I'm okay. I mean, even now, sometimes I'll even just sit beside him so that my back's not to the door either, in case we both need to respond. However, so what your brain does is in that moment, you do what you have to do to protect, to survive, to help the others survive, and you may pack that away. And you may not realize you packed it away. And then when you got home, you just got a couple of shots of bourbon, or you got 4 or 5 shots of bourbon because you weren't easily ready to wind down. And you said, I needed to wind down. Right. And the reality is your brain's still going and you can't sleep unless you wind down. Right. And then you're dragging yourself out of bed the next day because the 3 or 4 shots turned into 6 or 7 shots, or drinks. And now that becomes your way of coping. And you don't even realize that's your coping. You just, when I get home tonight, I'm just gonna, get me a little something to drink, sit down in front of the TV. And before you know it, it's 3 or 4 drinks as opposed to the one. And that becomes your norm.
Can you give us some positive realities to the trauma that, let's just, stay on that track with veterans and first responders? I mean, people hear a lot about PTSD, and, I know that, veterans and responders do cope with those things, whether it's drugs and alcohol. But my mind says to me, there's got to be some positive results or some positive avenues in which people deal with that type of trauma.
So there absolutely are. And I want to extend that. What I was saying is, so from that first part that I was saying about somebody going home in the evening, maybe having a few drinks, and it doesn't always have to be that. It could be somebody vegging out in front of a video game, right? For 8 or 9 hours. Because that's the way their brain slows down. It could be vegging out. It could be, binge watching The Housewives of Atlanta, right? Or whatever that is. It could be binge watching. That's not unsafe. That's not necessarily unhealthy. It also makes people, it also can find itself moving into PTSD. So PTSD doesn't happen right immediately. The symptoms of PTSD have to be long withstanding. And when we look at the diagnostic statistical manual that we use, the DSM-5-TR, there is a list of things, and it has time frames. Like, has this been happening for the last 6 months or for the last 30 days consistently? So there's time frames for that. It doesn't happen overnight. It is something that you're viewed. On the positive side, a lot of times people find positive ways of dealing with stress. Even if they don't go to a therapist, they might find themselves working out, right? So they're in the gym a lot and they're working out, or maybe they're running. Maybe they're running in the freezing cold. Okay. I don't know.
You never know. You
You
never
never
know.
know. No, but running, sometimes people who have experienced serious trauma like that, first responders, a lot of them are volunteers. They volunteer in places, soup kitchens. They volunteer at senior centers, places where they feel like they can make a difference. If somebody experienced a trauma where a lot of people died, a lot of times the volunteering is going places where a lot of people live. So where can I go? Can I volunteer at the school with the kids, or at the Boys and Girls Clubs? There's, just like, and I'm so glad you asked, because just like there's, a negative side of something, there's always a positive side to something. So oftentimes you'll see people doing things like that, things that they normally would have been out of their comfort zone doing. A lot of people aren't comfortable going around strangers and volunteering. So I used to do Meals on Wheels. I wasn't uncomfortable around strangers, but I I delivered Meals on Wheels. Used to love to see these people, every twice a month to go and deliver their meals. So yes, in answer to that question, there are positive ways that people do that. Like I said, working out, volunteering, being around children, um, trying to teach safety classes. Like that's another thing, safety and self-defense classes, so that people, when they find themselves in those situations, they don't feel like they are feeling in that moment. Like I don't want somebody to feel fearful. So what can I do to help? I can go and teach them safety. I can go help when they do the ringing the bell at school, the fire alarms at school that, for the safety. I remember when I was little, I don't know if they still do this running out of the school building, but we used to have to do that. They do a test and alarm and you got to stand out on the basketball court outside and the rain, sleet or hell. We're going to stand out on there. Everybody's on, is everybody out? Everybody's like, okay, and then you go back in. So people volunteer to do things like that to help people be safe in situations and so that they can feel safe. And it makes them feel better.
And Bettina, that's kind of taking me back a little bit too. We recently had a couple of episodes that we did where we were speaking about habits and what you were just talking about with repetition of things over time. One of the things we talked about is our responses. There's not good or bad habits. There are habits that work for you and
Right.
habits that work against you. Do you think there is an intersection between the habits that a person has and their response to trauma they may be carrying?
Absolutely. So if you already kind of have good habits, for example, and something traumatic happens to you, and listen, and I don't want anybody to think that all trauma is somebody dying, right? That's not all trauma. It's not all war and buildings falling and planes hitting buildings in war. It could be a puppy. It could be a divorce. That can be a traumatic situation for somebody. And
It could
and
be a roller coaster.
it could be a roller coaster, right? It could be something. It doesn't have to be. So my trauma is not your trauma. You can see something and say, "Oh, wow, that was awful," and go. And I can be like, now I can't breathe. I need, I need to get out of the area. And you not knowing me might be looking like, "Oh, wow, what is it?" It wasn't that serious. So everybody's trauma, all trauma is not created equal. That's probably the best way to put it, right? So what I find traumatic, you may not. If you have good habits already, then those good habits can help you. I won't say overcome. I will say they can help you work through a trauma. They really can. Because if you one of your habits, and I'll use running, I know people that are really good runners, and they run and they say it clears the fog, right? It clears their brain, and and they're able to think. For me, it's driving. I'll get in the car and I'll drive 9 hours to Virginia or wherever, and that's cathartic for me. That's my time to think.
Mhm.
I used to say I believe I can change hunger, world hunger and world peace by driving. I can solve it by driving across country. Give me some time and I can come up with some ideas. 9 hours later, I have figured out how we can solve this hunger and this peace situation. Because I'm looking at, and it's for me, and this is spiritual. I'm looking at all that God has created, even if it's a rainy day that I'm driving. I'm looking at all that God created. I'm thanking Him for all of my blessings. And for a lot of people, resilience is attached to their spirituality, whatever their religious practice is, whatever they believe in, whatever their higher power is. It may not be God. Some people have a different higher power. Whatever that higher power is, that is part of their resilience. And if that's their ritualistic habit of going to something when things go wrong or go left or right, that can be a way of being resilient. That's a type of resilience.
Let's stay on that spiritual track for a minute, because you had mentioned early on in the podcast about cultural trauma.
Mm.
And, when we talk about cultural trauma, you can think ethnicity, you can think geography, you can think religion, or any number of things. Give us some insight into how that plays into the trauma arena.
So, Frankie said something earlier about, re-looking at the way he was speaking to his son about, you, boy, you fine, just go ahead and whatever, right? And that's just not, that's just not a a cultural thing, right? That can be a man thing, period. So in the male culture, so to speak, that can be a man thing. You have people in the Asian culture, you have people in the Hispanic culture, you have people and cultures from Middle Eastern countries. And for example, a Middle Eastern country, some of those countries, women are not even allowed to go out and be out in the street on their own without a male with them. And sometimes that male can be a 4-year-old child, a 4-year-old boy, but you can't be out of the house without him. That child can go out of the house and run, and you can't even go get him. I'm saying that because I know somebody was in Pakistan who had that very situation. 4 or 5-year-old child could go out and walk around all day long, boy, right? You can't go out there looking for him. You're by yourself. You're a female and you're by yourself. If he's with you, you're okay. So culturally, Asian people, in some Asian cultures, no, not Asian people, in some Asian cultures, they just say you just have to muscle through. Stuff happens, you have to muscle through. That is all it is to it. I had an Asian client many years ago, and as we were talking, I was asking about her culture and how they felt about her seeing a therapist. And she says, I can't tell anybody I'm seeing a therapist. They don't believe in therapy. You just have to muscle through, and my family will be very angry with me if they find out that I have seen a therapist, because the first thing they're thinking is you're talking bad about us as a family. Like, we're not enough for you, and you should be able to get what you need from right here. And so they don't think that therapy is a positive thing. So she never, even though I broached the conversation of if she was comfortable talking to her family, and she said, That's something I will never do." And she was emphatic about it. It's just not gonna happen.
That's wild because, you grow up. After you get a certain age, you kind of learn things about some of your family members. It's like Uncle Joe over there. I'm not telling Uncle Joe. I'm not talking to Uncle Joe about nothing because Uncle Joe is just off his rocker,
Right. Right.
And I can see how that would make it difficult for someone who is looked down upon if they look for help elsewhere. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes you have family members that there's no way that you want to open yourself up and share with certain people. And sure, there's some that you will, but there's a few outliers in every family, I'm sure.
And so what about if Uncle Joe is the cause of your trauma?
Wow.
So Uncle Joe could very well be the cause of your trauma, and your family knows that Uncle Joe is the cause of your trauma. However, in your family, we don't put our business in the street. So Uncle Joe's been touching the girls in the family ever since. We know Uncle Joe's been doing that, and we tell everybody, stay out of Uncle Joe's room. Don't go in. Get away from that door. Stay out of Uncle Joe's room. However, Uncle Joe's been touching the girls, and now your 13-year-old is quite fast because she's been touched way too early. And now all you want to do is say, keep your fast tail in this house. Now you want to wonder why she's pregnant at 14 years old. And
Wow.
she's right in the house with Uncle Joe, and she has to be there with Uncle Joe because Uncle Joe lives in that back room in the house. And Uncle Joe's been touching people. And then you become an adult and you go to get some help. And then you start talking to somebody in your family that you can trust, and you find out it was you and 3 other of your female cousins, relatives, or siblings that Uncle Joe touched. And I'm saying touched to be nice.
And for all the Uncle Joes out there, we're not specifically talking about you, so don't worry about it.
No, it could be Uncle Henry or Uncle Fred. It could be. I mean, or it could be Aunt Maybelle. It's
Mhm.
not just Uncle Joe. Let's be very clear. There are a lot of young boys who were traumatized by an Aunt Maybelle or Aunt Myrna or your mama's friend who always thought you was real cute and thought it was okay to touch you at 12 years old.
So, for our audience members who are listening to this podcast today and hearing you educate us on trauma, and they're thinking, man, she's talking to me. Like, what steps should people take? What are some of the first steps that people should take to get help?
So the first thing that I would encourage someone to do, if you know that you had a traumatic incident or traumatic or traumatic incidents that have happened in your life, perhaps somewhere in a safe place that you can write them down. Write what you remember about it. Write it down. Um, and then think about how it's affected you. What do you do to avoid that right now? Like, there's certain places people don't go because of some traumatic incident. I don't go to places like that because, and whatever their because is, it doesn't matter what their because is, it's because of that traumatic incident. And then I would say, look for a therapist. Now, some people might say, well, I can't afford a therapist. There are a lot of places that you can go. There are places that you can go that you can call that either have therapists that do what we call a sliding scale, because we know everybody can't afford $130 an hour, right? And so we have a sliding scale. There are clients who are being seen at free clinics. There are clinics, community counseling clinics that will see you, and they have very, very good therapists. Just because it's a community counseling clinic, or the cost is very, very low, doesn't mean they don't have exceptional therapists there. It just means that most of those therapists are therapists who, some of them are coming out of training and are in the training, but they're under supervision, and they are really, really good therapists, and they really care about their clients that they're seeing. And or you go to your insurance. I would always encourage somebody to go and seek help. And if you are afraid to first go and seek help from people would think is a stranger, find a trusted agent around you. I think most of us have somebody that we find that we're really, really close to, and we feel like that's a trusted person in our life, and we can talk to them about the ugliest stuff that we've ever done, ever said, ever thought about, or has ever happened to us. Open up and start there. Because once you breath it and once you put it out of your mouth and you breathe it out of your body, it gives it less, um it doesn't have as much strength, right? When you hold it in, it has a strong hold on you, so it doesn't have that same lockdown on you that it had. Say it to somebody, say it out loud, whether you have to cry through it, whether you have to write them a letter and say, hey, I'm really trusting you in this situation. It's too hard for me to even speak these words of what happened to me. Start with that. Open your mouth, tell somebody, and from a spiritual perspective, pray about it. Pray about it first and seek help. You know, God is there because God can heal and he's a miracle worker. And I believe that. And he does all things. He also made it possible for you to go somewhere and talk to somebody that can give you that immediate feedback right in your face,
Hmm.
that can validate your feelings, that can teach you how to take care of yourself emotionally and psychologically, that can help you get in a space of healing. We're here for a reason. The same way there's architects that build houses, there are people, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, counselors that can help you heal that inner hurt. Because those traumatic things that happen to us, we call them soul injuries. They're injuries that have injured your soul. And a soul injury is not something that a doctor can put a stethoscope to and check your heart rate. However, a soul injury can cause high blood pressure, obesity, anorexia, can cause a heart attack because of stress. It can cause depression. So a soul injury can cause physical injury to you, can cause physical ailments.
So, for people who are looking for help, looking for someone to help them with, trauma informed care, like what do they look for? What are some of the key factors that they should look for as they're searching for someone to help them?
So there's a really good resource, and I was going to add this at the end. There's a really great resource. It's psychologytoday.com, and you can pull it up and you can pull up a therapist. I'm on psychologytoday.com. You can pull up a therapist in your area. You can find out if they accept your insurance. You can find out if they only do self-pay and if they will take a sliding scale based off of your income. And then you can research them and you can find out in their bio if they do trauma informed care. If they don't specialize in trauma, maybe they're marriage and family counseling and trauma is not their thing. So that's not the person you want to talk to. You want to talk to somebody who specializes in different trauma modalities. There's all different kinds of different trauma modalities. There's EMDR, and people can research those. And there's EMDR, and there's DBT, and even cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and there's all different kinds of, find out what modalities they use for trauma-informed care, if they specialize in trauma-informed care, because you don't want to go to an addiction specialist if their trauma is not their specialty. That's not where you want to be. I'm not an addiction specialist, so if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I have an addiction, so I'm going to refer you somewhere, and that's ethical. You don't just take clients because you want the money. You take clients because you actually can help them and you can do something for them. So I would always tell people, research your therapist. All therapists are not created equal. Not meaning some are not great and some are not great. That's the truth. However, when you meet with the therapist, ask them, hey, can I have a first interview with you and talk to you and find out? And sometimes therapists will give you a cut rate to have an interview with them. Some therapists will actually meet with you for free. And they'll say, that's not my specialty. However, I have a couple of referrals. Or here's where you can go back on the site and you can look for people to do that. Don't stay with a therapist because you signed up with them and you thought they were really good. And then 2 sessions in, you're not getting what you need. You tell them, thank you for your time, and you find someone else. You don't stay there because that's another thing that people do. They say, well, I don't want her to think, I don't think she don't know what she's doing. It doesn't have anything to do with what she thinks. You're not going there to help her. You're going to get help for yourself, her or him. You're going to get help for yourself. If a doctor doesn't do what he's supposed to do, or he's giving you bad medicine, you're not going to stay with that doctor because you don't want to hurt his feelings. You're going to leave. Unlike my grandmother, who stayed with her doctor all her life. Anyway, moving right along. He's absolutely not a great doctor. I digress. That's a senior issue too.
Well, since we're on a humorous note, I feel like I owe you and the audience, you Frankie and the audience, an explanation to my roller coaster comment earlier,
Please.
which is why you will not get me on a roller coaster today. I was a young kid. I can't believe I was more than about 6 years old when I had my first roller coaster ride. And I'm going to date myself here because when I start talking about it, folks are going to understand how long ago this was. So back in the day, roller coasters weren't this ginormous, steel frame, cushy chair roller coasters. This roller coaster was rickety, jackety, and it looked like it was built from wood, from what I can remember, with maybe like a little steel track. And you going up this roller coaster, right? And it's like shaking. And you go down, that was traumatic enough, right? The first dip. But then as you went around the corners, it was still shaking. Like it was, if any bolt came loose, that thing was going to hit the ground. And I kid you not, that experience right there wore me off roller coasters for life. That is my roller coaster. And I did get on one roller coaster as an adult. I think it was at Six Flags, but it was a type of roller coaster where the cars were actually underneath the track.
Mm,
So you weren't on top of it, was underneath.
right.
That one was okay, but that was the last roller coaster I've been on. So I think I've had a total of 2 roller coaster rides in my life. And that's it.
Well,
And
let me
that
just tell you,
was trauma, ma'am. That was trauma.
that sounds like trauma. Let me tell you that there are a couple of still wooden rickety roller coasters out there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of them is the Big Bad Wolf, and I can't remember whether that's at King's Dominion or Busch Gardens in Williamsburg. It's a couple wooden roller coasters out there that I have been on, and they are absolutely the same. So dating yourself or not, they still are rickety. You still doing this the whole way up and the whole way down. That's just what it is. I don't do now. I'm admittedly, I'm a bit of a what do they call that? One of those junkies that like a lot of
an adrenaline junkie.
Yeah, an adrenaline junkie, right? So I'm a bit of one. I don't know about the bungee jumping part. However, I'm a bit of an adrenaline. So I will get on a roller coaster. And however, I need that roller coaster to be metal because there are some rickety wood ones still out there. And that can be a very traumatizing experience for a child to get on something that's real. Now, I thought you were going to tell me that somebody fell off the roller coaster. I'm not going to lie. I was totally, I was sitting here waiting for this lady flew out of the roller coaster part. I'm glad she didn't know.
And somebody falling off the roller coaster is not going to be me. But put me on a motorcycle all day long. I'm in my happy place.
So me, I'm not in a roller coaster. I'm not on a motorcycle because all I can think about is if I fall, all my skin's coming off my body. I need more of a car around me. I need more. I need for the door to cave in and I still got an airbag and some more stuff to happen. I don't want any of that to happen. I'm just thinking that the leather that I'm wearing when I'm on that motorcycle is not going to save my thigh meat when we go skidding across the pavement. That's all I'm thinking about. Cause I'm, I like my thigh meat. It's, it can use some work. I like it. Right. So I get it. Everybody got their thing.
It's just kind of funny for me that, I won't get on the roller coaster, but I will get on that motorcycle.
You will get on a motorcycle. So I would like for each of you gentlemen, to think about something that you may have considered to be a traumatic, a childhood trauma that happened to you. You don't have to tell me exactly what it was. What I want to know from you is, do you feel like you were able to work through it, that you at some point became resilient about that particular trauma and you were able to work through it? And was it a negative or a positive way that you finally worked your way through it? Or it's something that you're still working through? Didn't expect that, did you, gentlemen?
Well, I can tell you, for me, there's one thing I do remember is my grandmother used to make us go pick the switches out the yard that she was going to whip us with. And you weren't going to come back with the shortest switch you could find, because that just made it worse. You had to go out there and find what she would believe. You had to find what she would believe was a good switch so that you could get a whipping with. And grandma would proceed to give you that whipping with that hand-picked switch by you. And then after the welts and the crying, my grandmother would say, "I come over here and give your grandmother a kiss and tell her you love her." That was some real trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, I think I got over that because on the flip side of that, my grandmother, her children, my mother's sisters, my grandfather, all of my cousins, brothers and sisters. I mean, there was a lot of love in our community. And I think that was really what helped me get through. Not the fact that I wasn't the only one on the end of that switch. I had some company. And so we could go out in the yard and commiserate over what had just happened. But that was really bad. I mean, I just couldn't believe as a young kid that, here this woman made me go pick a switch. She beat my tail, and then I had to hug her and kiss her, tell her I loved her. I mean, then it was hard. It was hard. And I guess I still don't understand the total philosophy behind what she was doing.
Right.
I guess maybe keeping me from being mad at her forever. But I don't think that I carried that with me, throughout my life. But I remember it.
And so, you said got over it. And I would, not to change your words, I would say you made it through, right?
Yeah.
One of the things in therapy we don't do is we don't tell people to get over it, right? So you made it through. And part of your resilience, it sounds like to me, was the fact that you had a collective, you had a community, right? That whether it was cousins that had gone through the same thing, and you were able to get together and say, I can't believe that she made me go get, so you had, that is a level of resilience. You had a community that you could talk to about it, and whether you fussed about it or griped about it or was mad about it. And that whole come and kiss me, that was, yes, maybe to make you not call yourself being mad at me about that. And it certainly didn't make that person feel better about it, or because they knew they were forcing you to do it. Right. So, but you better not say no. And stuff like that, what stuff like that also does to a lot of people, and me included, I had the same kind of experience. What that made me do is say, what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't do that to my children. Right. So that's one thing I definitely would not do to my children, because it was traumatic for me and I didn't like it when it happened to me. So I'm not going to do that to somebody else. So it made me, to me, what I feel like was a little better in that situation. And not better than, I'm just saying it made me be a better
Sure.
parent as far as
Sure.
I was concerned. What about you, sir? Mr. Frankie?
Yeah. What about you, sir?
So for me, um, in childhood, I mean, and if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you that this carried into adulthood. I was very weird. Weird interests, weird activities. I was a big young sci-fi nerd, all into science and wanting to do experiments and all this other good stuff. And some of the other kids in the neighborhood didn't understand that. And I wasn't able to relate to them. And at one point, I forget what we were doing, but somebody called me a coward.
Mm,
And for some reason, that just really bothered me. Because because it was contrary to how I perceived myself. I thought I was adventurous. I was trying to, discover things. I was trying to broaden my mind and my imagination and all this other stuff. But because I wouldn't do this physically uh, sketchy stunt or whatever, I was a coward. And the way that I dealt with it initially is like, all right, well, I'm going to try to do something. So of course I go home. What do? We build a ramp and jump my bike off this ramp just to see if I can do it. So let me apply my science to make sure that it's a good solid ramp with the right angles and all that other stuff. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna build a tree command center. I'm gonna climb about 20 feet up this tree and string zip lines to different points in the woods and all this other stuff. So that was my coping mechanism. And I think it's even carried forward today to, I still do weird stuff. Like, the race that I just told you about at the top of the
mhm.
conversation where I'm going to be in freezing cold, wading through water, or some of the other obstacle races and things that I do. I think that was part of the way I kind of managed that trauma, is trying to show that the things that I used to identify myself that I thought were core parts of me
Mhm.
were enough to cover what their perception was of what it meant to be brave.
So I'm going to do the same thing with you that I did with Nuge, and that
Mhm.
is to tell you I'm going to remove the word weird, right? Because I just think that you used another word and that was adventurous. And that's exactly what you are. So you're not weird. You're adventurous. Because in almost everything that you do, I can almost bet that there's somebody else doing that. There's somebody else out there racing. They're
Mhm.
not weird either. They're adventurous. Because I wouldn't do it, or because the person beside you wouldn't do it, doesn't make you weird. It makes you adventurous. You have your own, you have a self-perception. Like you said, I didn't see myself as a coward. I saw myself as adventurous or someone that liked to explore. I mean, that's exactly who you are. So I would ask you never to use the word weird again, because that is not a description of who you are. You're different because you're supposed to be different. We're not all cookie cutters. We're not all supposed to be cookie cutters. We're not that gingerbread cookie sheet that they use when they make gingerbread, right? We're not that. So you're supposed to be different. So you do as many races in the cold, or polar races or polar jumps or whatever it is you want to do. You do as many of those as makes you feel good about yourself, because your self-perception of you is your reality, right? Our perception is our reality. So you are an adventurous person as opposed to being a weird person. Yeah, children might have said you were weird and they might have said you were a coward. That's not who you were. You were adventurous and you wanted to do the 20-foot thing and the building. And let me just tell you, the whole ramp thing, if you didn't do that ramp or whatever they were trying to, good for you, because my brother used to build ramps and I jumped and he broke his arm because he thought he was Evil Knievel. Okay. And he ended up with a broken arm. So good for you for not getting on that ramp and jumping
Yeah.
your bicycle over it. Cause listen, no matter what happened, it was some old wood that we found from a construction site that we put on some old
Facts.
cinder blocks. Okay. The cinder blocks were not steady and none of us were scientists. So we hadn't done what the perception was and how the calculation of how we were going to end up and how that back tire that wasn't screwed on right wasn't going to fly off. We didn't do any of
Mhm.
that. So you saved yourself a broken arm, sir, probably. So I wanted to ask you all that question because I wanted you to not just in this moment, I wanted you to walk away thinking, about with your people that you love that are next to you. Maybe there's some children or family members or somebody who may have experienced a childhood trauma, and something that they do seems odd and out of pocket for you that we don't normally see in other people. That may be their coping mechanism. And it doesn't have to be drinking or promiscuity or drugs. It doesn't have to be that. It could be a repetitious thing that they just do, and they feel like they have to do it, because a lot of times trauma, unresolved or unhealed trauma, shows up as OCD because it's something you can control. In your mind, you can control that, right? So the person that goes and they turn the doorknob 20 times, they have to turn it 20 times, or whatever number of times they have to do it. I can control that. I can go touch that 20 times and I feel better. And if I don't touch it, then I'll leave the house, realize I only touched it 10, but I'm going to come back home. And that's the obsession, right? So the compulsion, the obsession, that's why they call it obsessive compulsive disorder, because you're obsessing about it, which drives the compulsion to do it. And there are people who have been late for work because they have to do things like that. However, I just want you to be mindful. If you see something, and even when we think we've given our children the greatest childhood and we brought them up the best way and this, that, and the other, maybe do a check-in with them. Maybe it was something that happened in school. It might not have anything to do with you. That trauma might not have anything to do with you. It could have just been what happened at school. People teased and picked on, or is constantly calling them weird. My son said to me one time when he was younger, he said, and I won't keep you all much longer. My son said to me, because he was that kid that was a brainiac. He read at 3 years old. He was, reading at 3 years old. He was talking at 13 months, and he was having conversations with people by 15, 16 months. He was talking, and people thought, they started calling him in school Bill Nye the Science Guy, and Billy and this, that, and the other, and nerd. And I said, how do you feel when people call you a nerd? And he said to me, I think it's a compliment. I was like, come on through, baby boo. I am loving every bit of this. He just was not having it, and then another thing, right? He had, what do they call that? He had alopecia areata, right? So in the back, his hair had really come out, and he kept a short haircut. He got a big quarter size, spot. And they, and they had to end up giving him shots. The dermatologist gave him shots in his head, and now he's got this full head of hair and locks and da, da, da. I went and got that done, and I said, so Trey, how would you feel if somebody says, you have a bald spot there? He says, I'll just tell him it's alopecia areata. It's not contagious. And he went on about his business. I was more traumatized by it than he was. He's like, whatever, So he had a really great sense of self about who he was and who he is. And that was great. And I'm sure if I asked him if he had some kind of trauma growing up, he would probably tell me. I think it was a girl that bullied him in school at one point, and he felt a little bit helpless. So we have to find ways to make sure. I would ask you to nurture the people around you, your adults, whether it's your wife, your mate, your siblings, your cousin. You don't have to say, hey, what was your trauma? Because that's my job as a therapist. That's what I would do. So what did happen to you when you was little? Why are you doing that, right? Why are you putting too much salt in the potatoes? You don't have to do that. Give somebody grace. Give them some grace. It could absolutely be something that they haven't resolved and they haven't even figured out how to resolve. Or they figured out how to resolve it, or they're too ashamed or too afraid to resolve it, because they've lived with it. And when people live with a certain level of trauma and habits, sometimes they're afraid to let them go. What would I do if I don't have my OCD? What do I have now? What do I have left?
Bettina, we really appreciate you being with us. I mean, I think this was a phenomenal episode.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate everything that you shared. Frankie, I'm going to give you a few minutes here to have a few last words, if you will.
Last words. I don't think I have any of those, but yeah, Bettina, thank you for being in the space. It's really, really evident that you're passionate about what you do, passionate about helping folks. What is it that brings you fulfillment in what you do here?
So what brings me fulfillment is knowing that I'm working with people, whether it's and I don't work with as many young people as I did as much. I do still have young clients. Knowing that somebody that was stuck, right? Because that's what happens. Sometimes when someone experiences a trauma, they find themselves stuck in that place. They find themselves stuck in whatever that age was, and they can go on and they can be an architect or a model or whatever. They still have a stuck mentality in some ways in that place. Knowing that I'm helping somebody get to a place of healing and breathing and saying to me sometimes, I never knew I could be this person. I never imagined I could be this person. And I thank you so much for helping me get there. So helping somebody get unstuck, for lack of a better phrase, is what brings me joy. And there are a lot of people that are dealing with, I'm going to make sure I say this, that are dealing with trauma, mental illness, um, all kinds of things, right? Depression, anxiety, mental illness. You see people on the street. I just want to add this as a note. You see people on the street that are homeless, who may be talking to themselves. They may have had some kind of traumatic experience. They may be dealing with some kind of mental illness, and people think, well, why is that person on the street? And why aren't they at their family's house? And why isn't their family taking care of them? Take a step back from the judgment pool, right? Get out of the judgment pool and recognize that whatever that they're dealing with, they could have caused trauma in the households that were willing to open the doors. Not even intentionally causing it, but just because of the mental illness that they're dealing with, they may have caused so much trauma, whether it's stealing or fighting or whatever it is, because they haven't figured out how to get the help for their mental illness. And so that's why they're on the street, because the people in the houses can't deal with what's happening or what has happened, and they have to keep safety in their own homes. If you know somebody that's going through something, there's a national line that you can call, and it is 988. That is not just a suicide line, that is also the crisis line. So if you see somebody or you know somebody that's going through a crisis, they can't pull themselves together, you can call 988 and they'll find out exactly where you are, and they'll send a team out, what we call a crisis team. I used to work for the crisis team here in Georgia, and they'll send mental health professionals out to assess the person on the spot. It doesn't mean they're taking them anywhere. It doesn't mean they may just come out and give resources. And then in some cases, they might have to remove them from the home for the safety of the people in the home and themselves, or for society as a general whole. So just remember 980.
Absolutely. And just thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us today, Bettina, because as we're going through and as our listeners are going through, the pause, the shift and the ignite framework, along the way in that pause, it's highly likely that we may unearth or rediscover some trauma that we've been holding on to.
Right.
And knowing how to deal with that trauma is going to be critical for us to be able to shift our mindset so that we can ignite into that new state that we're shooting for. So thank you for sharing that with our listeners today.
Absolutely. It has been a pleasure, gentlemen. It is always a pleasure being here with you.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're glad to have you. Frankie, tell our audience where they can find us, please.
Well, for all things PSI Effect Podcast, you can find our website. This is psipod.com. There you can find a link to all of our episodes and all of the different platforms where the podcast can be found in audio format. So Amazon Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the places. So please find us and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find us on social media and YouTube at our handle at This is PSI Pod. So check us out and engage in the conversation.
Awesome, awesome. Well, for our audience, we're going to make sure that you have the resources that Bettina has mentioned here. We'll put that in the notes section of the podcast, so you'll have access to that. And, again, we want to give a big thank you to Bettina. And if you have not seen the veterans episode, go back and take a look at that. And I will just let you in on a little secret. We're going to have Bettina come back down the road somewhere for yet another aspect of who she is. She's so dynamic. We got to have her come back and share a little something else with you. So just a little nugget for you to keep track of the PSI Effect podcast and keep tuning in, because we got good stuff coming for you.
Hey,
So,
news before we close out.
yes, sir.
Bettina, where can our listeners kind of find you? Because you've got a lot of irons in the fire. Where can they engage with you?
I do. And so I am a part of a podcast as well. It's called the Say What Podcast is WHAAT, and we are on the second and fourth Saturday of the month. We're live, and you can find us on YouTube as well as Facebook. And it is the SAYWHAAT podcast. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give a shout out because I wrote the song and my brother actually performed the song for our podcast.
Nice.
So, and it's a really cool song. My brother Mark did it. And so, yes, you can find me on the Say What podcast. And I'm not going to, I'm on psychologytoday.com. I'm not really taking new clients. I'm pretty full. So I'm not going to do that so that people are like, oh, I need to call her. Now, if they want to get in contact with me and ask about resources, they can go on the Psychology Today website, and they can send me a message because I get emails directly to my counseling email address, and I could refer or something, but I'm not really taking clients. And I may, take one or two clients here in Georgia. I'm a pretty busy person, so and I'm grateful. I thank God for the busyness.
You get to be busy.
Yes,
Yeah.
I get to see a lot of clients. I get to help a lot of people.
Well, again, this has been a very exciting episode. We're just thrilled to have you here. I know that you have given our audience some things to think about, some things to consider in their own lives. And so that's what we're here for. That's what it's all about here at the PSI Effect podcast. So thank you both very much. And to our audience, just remember that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are legendary. And until next time, be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.